Okay, guys, we're going to look at making the peace and a little bit after the war, referring to World War I. During the war, Woodrow Wilson really had this ambition to shape the peace process and the peace settlement. In January 1917, he had said that the United States would insist on a peace without victory. A year later, he's going to present to Congress a detailed list of his war aims, and that would be the 14 points. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these 14 points, but you can see them there. Pause if you want to copy anything, but just be aware of these so that we can come back to them later and see how many of them did he actually get through. Down just below the middle, it says autonomous development for the peoples of Austria-Hungary. That's who that's referring to if you're not sure about AH. But you will need to know some of these in order to refer back to them in order to know what got through and what did not. So with the 14 points, we're going to divide them into two sections here, territorial questions and broad principles. The territorial questions would be a return of Alsace and Lorraine to France and the German evacuation of Belgium in the west and Romania and Serbia in the east. Now, greater significance will be the broad principles. This would be recognition of freedom of the seas, an end to the practice of making secret treaties, reduction of national armaments, weapons, and impartial adjustment of all colonial aims or claims, self-determination for the various nationalities within Austro-Hungarian Empire, and a general association of nations for the purpose of affording mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike. This was the most valued point of Wilson, and the international association he envisioned would be the League of Nations. Now, Wilson's proposals included reaching agreements openly rather than through secret diplomacy, reducing those military weapons. He was looking out for domestic safety and seeking self-determination. Think of it as a very democratic aim. Now, the Treaty of Versailles, the peace conference following the armistice or ceasefire took place at the Palace of Versailles in Paris, January of 1919. Every nation that had fought on the Allied side in the war was represented. Before this, no U.S. president had ever traveled abroad to attend a diplomatic conference. But to defend his 14 points, Wilson went, and he went with some criticism. Republicans criticized him for being accompanied to Paris by several Democrats, but only one Republican, and that guy's advice was never actually sought. So, the secret treaties and agreements that had been made prior to the conference conflicted with the hopes of self-determination that Wilson desired. Now, the big four, we have David Lloyd George of Great Britain, George Clemenceau of France, Vittorio Orlando, Italy, Woodrow Wilson, United States. Inconsistent desires for the peace process. The other heads of state had made it clear that their nations wanted both revenge against Germany and compensation, indemnities, and territory. And they did not share Wilson's idea at all. So the peace terms. When the peace conference adjourned, this was June of 1919, the Treaty of Versailles included certain things. Germany was disarmed, stripped of its colonies in Asia, Africa, also forced to admit guilt for the war, accept French occupation of the Rhineland for about 15 years, pay a huge sum of money in reparations to Great Britain and France. Applying the principles of self-determination, other territories controlled by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia were taken by the Allies. Independence was granted to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Poland. New nations, Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, were established. Now, signers of the treaty would join the international peacekeeping organization called the League of Nations. This Article 10 of the Covenant or Charter of the League called on each member nation to stand ready to protect the independence and territorial integrity of other nations. and this was a difficult point in getting ratification of the treaty within the United States. Now, 14 points versus Treaty of Versailles. You can see how they open up here. 14 points is wanting open diplomacy, self-determination, where the Treaty of Versailles is looking for guilt assignment, reparations, punishment. Both reduce arms and both seek League of Nations. Now, ratification. President Wilson had to win the approval of 2/3 of the Senate for all parts of the Treaty of Versailles, including the League of Nations. Republican senators raised objections to the League. They argued that the United States membership in such a body might interfere with U.S. sovereignty, might also call European nations to interfere in the Western Hemisphere, which was a violation of the Monroe Doctrine. So after the war, there is an increased partisanship, okay? And you have opponents of the Treaty of Versailles here, the irreconcilables and the reservationists. Senators opposed the Treaty of Versailles were divided in these two groups. Irreconcilables had about a dozen Republican senators. They could not accept the U.S. membership in the League no matter what. The reservationists was a larger group led by Senate Republican Henry Cabot Lodge, and he could accept the League if certain reservations were added to the covenant. Wilson had the option of either accepting Lodge's reservations or fighting for the treaty. He chose to fight, and he thought the best way to fight would be to gain support from the United States, from the citizens. So he conducted a Western tour to gain that support. He pushed himself so hard that he collapsed after one of his speeches. After returning to Washington, he suffers a massive stroke, and he never fully recovers from this. But the treaty still has to be dealt with. The treaty still has to be ratified in some way. Several votes on the treaty and rejection multiple times. Senate votes twice, November 1919, and it's defeated both times. November 1920, you have some Democrats join the reservationist Republicans. They vote with reservations. Wilson is still fighting this battle. He does not want reservations, so he gets his supporters to reject that. They join with the irreconcilables. It's not until after Wilson leaves office in 1921 that the United States officially ends the war and makes a peace with Germany. It never ratifies the Treaty of Versailles, and we never joined the League of Nations. Now, post-war problems, we have several things. The demobilization, Red Scare, labor conflict, strikes of 1919, race riots. And what you'll see is they're all kind of tied together here. With the demobilization, during the war, 4 million American men had been taken from civilian life and the domestic economy, and stepping in would be the women and African Americans. Now suddenly they're back home, and so they took employment from women and African Americans who for a short time had thrived with the war work. Okay, the business boom of wartime also went flat, and factory orders for war production are falling off. European farm products are back on the market, so there's increased competition, and the United States farmers are suffering from the falling prices and that competition. In the cities, you have consumers who are going on a buying spree, and this leads to inflation, a short boom in 1920, but that spree does not last. That boom does not last. 1921, business plunged into a recession. We have a 10% unemployment. 10% of the American workforce was unemployed at that time. Now, inflation and unemployment are a major issue. You also have a Red Scare. 1919, we have widespread unhappiness with the peace process. Growing fears of socialism are fueled by a communist takeover in Russia, labor unrest at home. The anti-German hysteria shifts to anti-communist hysteria, and that's known as a Red Scare. We have the Palmer raids resulting from a series of unexplained bombings. And Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer establishes a special office or a special force under J. Edgar Hoover. They're to gather information on radicals. Palmer also orders mass arrest of anarchists, socialists, labor agitators. Between November 19 through January 1920, over 6,000 are arrested based on limited criminal evidence. Most are foreign-born. About 500 of them are actually deported. Palmer warns of a huge riots on May Day of 1920, but they never took place. So he loses credibility, and with rising concerns about civil liberties, it causes that Red Scare hysteria to recede. But that doesn't fix the labor conflict, the strikes, and the race riots. Now, before the war, there's a little distrust of unions, but during the war, they have some success and important gains. A series of strikes in 1919 and fear of revolution turned that around. The first major strike was Seattle in February. 60,000 unionists joined shipyard workers in a peaceful strike for higher pay. Troops were called out, no violence. Boston, September, police went on strike to protest a firing of a few police officers. They tried to unionize. Massachusetts Governor Calvin Coolidge sent in the National Guard, broke up the strike. September, workers for the U.S. Steel Corporation strike. State and federal troops are called out. There's considerable violence at that point, and the strike is broken in January of 1920. We also have race riots. Many African Americans had migrated to the northern cities during the war, taking jobs, and that's going to increase racial tension for jobs and housing. Race riots erupt. Largest was in the East St. Louis in 1917. 1919, racial tension leads to violence in many cities. The worst is Chicago, where 40 people were killed, 500 injured. Conditions in the South, still not that great either, with continued prejudice and racial violence and lynchings taking place. So the legacy of World War I, we changed the way that wars were fought. The power of government is going to be increased. It opens the door for just insecurity and uncertainty, and the whole idea of normalcy, whatever normalcy really is, was kind of over. And we're going to move into this period, 1920s, 30s, and build up and head straight into World War II. Make sure that you've noted this. Watch it again if you need to. Bring your notes to class. You will be held accountable. Sorry for the inconvenience of not being there, but sometimes it just can't be helped. Thanks a lot.